The wind pushed red dust through the crooked streets of Dustridge, Arizona Territory, late autumn of 1877. The sky was copper and low, the kind of sky that made shadows stretch long and strange across the ground. The air carried the smell of sweat, gun oil, and whiskey. But today, the crowd had gathered for something different. They were not here for cattle, not for land, but for women. The last name left on the auction block was Eloise Madawa. She stood tall in the center of the platform, her dress faded from too many days on the trail. The fabric clung stiffly to her frame, dirt ground into every fold. Her boots were split at the seams, her face sunburned and windburned from travel, but it wasn't her clothes or the dust that held the crowd's gaze. It was the scar, a pale mark curved along her left wrist, half hidden beneath the worn gloves she refused to take off. Some men whispered about it, some muttered she was marked trouble. The auctioneer cleared his throat and shuffled his ledger, his patience running thin. Last bride of the season, folks. Eloise Madawa, 24, writes, no ailments that I can see. She's strong enough for work and quiet enough for peace. His words fell into the dry air. No one stepped forward. Eloise did not smile or wave. She did not beg. She only lifted her chin slightly, her dark braid tight against her back, her cracked lips pressed firm. The silence spread uneasy through the crowd. She don't even look scared. One man muttered, ain't natural. Another spat in the dust, scarred, stubborn, and hardied. That's no wife. That's bad luck. The auctioneer sighed, ready to close the book. Well, guess that's it. Then, I'll take her, the voice came low and rough, rolling from the shadows of the saloon's beams. The crowd turned. A tall figure stepped into the sunlight, boots heavy in the dust. His hat brim hung low, shadowing most of his face, and his coat bore the scars of hard years on the trail. Cass Whitlow. The name slid through the crowd like a shiver. Folks whispered, ain't he the one that lost his wife and kid in the Comanche fire? Thought he died with them. He lives out by Widow's Bluff, never talks, never stays. Cass walked straight to the platform, his movements steady, heavy with silence. He pulled a folded cloth from his pocket and set a stack of bills in the auctioneer's hand. The exact amount, no haggling, no questions. The auctioneer hesitated. Cass, you sure you ain't ever? Cass looked up. Just a flick of his eyes. It was enough. The man shut his mouth. Eloise studied him from the platform. He didn't leer, didn't grin, didn't even speak to her. He only looked at her with a steady calm. No cruelty in his eyes, no pity either. Just a quiet weariness, like someone dragging himself through one more day. Go on, the auctioneer muttered. She's yours. Cass's voice came slow, gravel smoothed by time. Come on, we ride before dark. No promises, no threats, just a trail waiting. Eloise stepped down from the platform, her hand brushing the scar at her wrist. She was not afraid, not yet, but she did not feel safe either. Cass helped her onto the back of his horse without a word. The animal groaned under the double weight, then turned westward. Townsfolk watched as the strange pair rode away. The silent girl no one wanted, and the ghost of a man who had raised his hand when no one else would. Dust settled behind them, erasing their trail from the eyes of the town. By the time the sky had deepened to violet, they reached a lonely cabin pressed against the dark line of the hills. The fences were broken, the barn sagging, the land wide and empty. Cass dismounted, held the reins for her, and pointed toward the house. It's yours. Then he led the horse to the barn. Eloise stepped inside. The cabin was plain but clean. A single bed, a small hearth, a table, 2 chairs. Bread and dried meat sat on the counter. No locks, no chains, no shouted orders, just silence. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and ate a little. Then she sat by the window, staring out into the night. He hadn't touched her, hadn't even looked at her twice. Somehow that unsettled her more than the alternative. When the moon rose, she made her choice. She slid a paring knife into her boot, pulled the blanket tight and stepped outside. Her breath smoked in the cold. She crossed the yard toward the fence line. She had no plan, no horse, but she had walked across worse. From the shadows near the barn, Cass appeared. He hadn't drawn a weapon. He just stood there. Steady as the dark. You lost. His voice was calm, not mocking, not angry. Her hand clutched the knife handle. He tilted his head. Do what you want, miss, but the coyotes won't wait for introductions. The knife trembled in her grip. His eyes stayed on her, steady as stone. I'm not your jailer. You can leave, but if you do, you'd best keep walking till sunrise. The wind cut cold through the yard. She looked at the line of hills, then at him. Slowly, she turned back toward the house. Cass did not move. He only watched her walk inside. Later, Eloise noticed the fire was burning in the hearth. A pot of water sat warming on the edge, just enough for tea or a wash. He had lit it while she tried to run. Through the window, she saw him curl up against the barn wall, wrapped in a blanket, taking the cold ground for himself while she had the bed. Not every cage had locks. Some were made of silence. Eloise sat by the fire, fingers brushing the scar at her wrist, and wondered if maybe for tonight she could stop running. The first light of morning crept over the hills, soft and pale. Frost clung to the roof of the barn, melting slow as the sun stretched across the valley. Eloise rose. Before the rooster crowed, she wrapped herself in her shawl and walked to the well. Her breath puffed white in the air as she hauled up water, her arms aching with each pull of the rope. The rhythm steadied her heart. Work was something she understood. By the time Cass stepped from the barn, the fire was already burning. The porch swept and the coop cleaned. He gave her a single nod as he passed. No words, no smile. She nodded back. It was the start of something neither of them could name. Days slid into one another. Cass spent his time fixing the broken fence, tending to the tired old horse, hammering out shoes in the small shed that served as his forge. Eloise stayed close to the house and garden, not because he told her to, but because it gave her purpose. They spoke little. But the silence between them wasn't empty. It was filled with small acts. One morning, Eloise found a neat stack of dry firewood outside the door, more than she could have carried alone. Another evening, she noticed a loaf of bread, still warm, waiting on the table before she had stepped into the kitchen. Cass never mentioned it. She didn't either. She gave back in her own way. She mended the torn elbow of his winter coat, oiled the squeaky hinge on the kitchen window, and set a mug of hot tea beside his tools at dusk. Their exchanges were quiet, stitched in deeds, not words. One afternoon, while splitting kindling, a splinter cut deep into Eloise's palm. She wrapped it in cloth and bit her tongue against the sting. That evening, she washed the bloodied rag behind the house. Hoping he hadn't seen, Cass had, he said nothing, but the next morning she found a pair of new gloves on the table. Soft leather, fine stitching, her size, exactly. She touched them, slipped them on, and said nothing, but in her chest something stirred, faint and dangerous, like light slipping through a crack. That night, Cass pulled a harmonica from a wooden box and played by the fire. Tune was slow, wandering, heavy with sorrow. Eloise sat nearby, listening. When he finished, she placed a small apple tart beside him, crumbled but sweet. He glanced at it, then at her, and the corner of his mouth twitched into the faintest smile. It was the first she had seen. The days grew colder. Riders brought news from the east. Smoke rising in the distance. Wagons burned. Family fleeing. A rogue band had broken off from the tribes, angry and starving, striking at the edges of settlements. Cass began checking the rifles each morning. His hands were steady, his eyes grave. One evening his voice came low. Stay close to the house. If something happens, bolt the cellar door and don't come out until I do. Eloise clutched the gloves he had given her and nodded. That night, dogs howled. The wind carried a whistle, sharp as a knife. Then came the hoof beat-hats, heavy as thunder rolling across dry earth. Cass was already outside, lantern dousted, rifle raised. Eloise Crouched in the root cellar, heart hammering, but through the cracks in the floor, she saw torches and heard the wild cries. Gunfire split the night. Cass's voice roared over the chaos. Get away from the house. Eloise's body told her to stay hidden, but her spirit pushed her up the ladder. She lifted the trapdoor and peered outside. Flames licked at the barn. Horses screamed. Cass stood at the fence line, rifle firing into the night. A man rushed him. Cass dropped him. Another charged. Cass struck him down with the butt of his gun. Then came the boy. He couldn't have been older than 14. His face was painted, his spear crude, his eyes wild with fury or grief. Eloise couldn't tell which. He ran straight at Cass. Cass lifted his rifle but froze. His finger hovered on the trigger. His arm trembled, then dropped. No, he whispered. The boy hesitated only a heartbeat, then turned and vanished into the smoke. The rest scattered, retreating into the hills. The fight ended as suddenly as it began. Eloise ran to Cass, helping him back toward the porch. His brow was cut, blood trailing down his temple. She pressed cloth to the wound, her hands shaking. Why didn't you shoot? Cass's voice was hollow. I saw his face, too young, too familiar. He swallowed hard. I was a cavalry officer once. We burned their homes, drove them out. One morning, we came back to the ashes. Didn't see the children until it was too late. We called it a victory, but it was murder. The fire crackled and silence stretched thick between them. Eloise's chest etched at the weight of his words. Every time I see one of those boys, he whispered, I see the ones I already killed. She placed the cloth firmer against his brow. Then thank you, she said softly, for not adding to it. For the first time. He met her gaze without looking away. His eyes were tired, broken, but alive. Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to know. The next morning, Eloise kept busy with the house, sweeping and folding what little they had. While clearing the bedroom corner, she found a battered leather trunk hidden beneath an old blanket. Curiosity tugged at her. She lifted the lid. Inside were bundles of letters tied with frayed string. The ink had faded, but the names were clear. Elena, June, Abigail, his wife, his daughters. Her hands trembled as she opened one. The words bled with sorrow. I gave the order. I let the fire take them. I walk among the living, but I burned with you. This land does not forgive. And neither should you. Before she could close it, the door slammed. Cass stood in the frame, his face shadowed and hard. His eyes dropped to the open trunk, then to her. What the hell are you doing? I was cleaning, she stammered. I found the trunk. I didn't mean. You didn't mean to. His voice cracked sharp. He crossed the room, snatched the letter, and threw it into the fire. The paper curled, blackened and vanished in flame. You don't get to touch that part of me. You don't get to read it like some story. Eloise's chest burned. You wrote it, so why destroy it? Because it never should have existed. Her fists clenched. If you had the courage to write it, have the courage to live with it. Cass's jaw tightened. This is my house, my ghosts. You don't get to dig them up. You already buried them. She shot back, her voice low but steady. But you're still the one carrying the shovel. Quote. The silence between them snapped like a whip. Cass stormed out. He didn't return for supper. Fire died low, leaving the cabin cold, the air heavy with something broken. Eloise sat awake all night, staring at the stars through the window. By dawn, she found a page on the table, charred at the edges, one side nearly gone. It was the same letter she had seen. Cass stood behind her, arms crossed, eyes unreadable. You didn't burn it all, she whispered. He answered softly. Didn't save it either, just couldn't finish. Her eyes blurred. Sometimes not finishing is enough. For the first time, his voice cracked with something fragile. Maybe days later, Eloise went to the well at sunrise. Two men came out of nowhere, rough hands dragging her down, a sack over her head. She fought, but they tied her fast. By the time Cass stepped out of the barn, the yard was empty. The bucket lay spilled in the dirt, water sinking into the dust. Tracks cut north into the hills. Cass saddled his horse without a word, checked his rifle, and rode hard. He found them by a ridge, 3 men around a fire and Alois bound to a tree. Her face was streaked with blood, but her eyes met his. She didn't scream. Cass fired. The first shot dropped their lookout. The camp burst into chaos. 1 man lunged at Alois with a knife. Cass charged, gun empty, swinging the rifle like a club. The blade found his side. Blood soaked through his coat, but he didn't falter. He fought until the last man fell to the ground, and the others fled. He dropped to his knees, gasping, clutching his wound. Alois rushed to him, tearing free of her ropes. "Cass, stay with me." His voice was weak, breaking with each word. I thought I had nothing left to protect. Her hands pressed to his wound, tears hot on her face. You have me." He looked at her, eyes heavy with pain and shame. "You came like punishment for all I've done. Then stop punishing yourself," she whispered. "Let me teach you how to live again." Cass smiled faintly, a crooked, broken smile. "I don't know how." "Start here," she said firmly, holding his face steady. "Start with me." He gripped her hand. "Don't let them turn you hard." "Promise me I won't," she swore. "If you promise not to leave me." His breath rattled, but his hand squeezed hers. It was enough. Help came hours later. A rancher drawn by the gunfire. Cass barely clung to life, but Alois never left his side. She held his hand through the long ride back, whispering, "I'm here, I'm not leaving." Weeks passed. Fever racked him, wounds slow to heal, but Alois stayed. She cooked when he could not stand, cleaned his wounds, and read aloud at night. Sometimes his letters, sometimes her own words. She wrote in his journal when he could not, "I am sorry, but I want to live." When spring came, Cass walked again, slower but alive. Their days found rhythm. She learned to ride hard, to shoot, to mend fences. He watched her grow stronger, steadier, not afraid. One quiet evening, he placed a small iron ring on the table, forged by his own hands, rough but strong. "It isn't gold," he said, "but it's real." Like us, Alois slipped it onto her finger, eyes glistening. "I don't need gold." And in front of the town's folk, in the very place where she had once stood as something to be bought, Cass and Alois chose each other freely. Their wedding was simple. Wild flowers she picked herself, neighbors bringing bread, the wind carrying their vows across the valley. For the first time in years, Alois smiled, not from survival, but from joy. And Cass, the broken cowboy, found something he thought he had lost forever, a reason to live. Together, they built a life not out of chains, not out of silence, but out of choice.